Chapter 11 of Travels and Adventures of an Orchid Hunter by Albert Millican. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Port of Honda. The Cattleya trianae has been found for years near the town of Ibagué in the state of Tolima, a little more than 100 miles from Bogota in a southwesterly direction. This Cattleya is found under much the same circumstances as the others of its family, at an altitude of about 4,000 feet above sea level. To reach it, it is necessary to ascend the river Magdalena for a considerable distance, and then land on the west bank. There is little of interest in the mule ride, except the sight of the majestic snow-capped mountains called the Paramo de Ruiz. These tower up to the height of 16,000 feet, with a glistening top of eternal snow, which makes them conspicuous at a great distance from many parts of the road. Cattleya trianae is found over a wide area, but all the plants taken from these parts, as well as from Pacho, La Palma, etc., must be brought to a small town called Honda. This is the principal port of the Magdalena River, about 600 miles from the sea. Swift running rapids prevent the larger steamboats going further up the river than Honda, but another line of boats has been built above the rapids. These vessels navigate the river for 300 miles more to a place called Neiva. Hundreds of mules, carrying every imaginable class of produce, throng the road from Bogota to Honda. On arriving on the banks of the Magdalena, everything in the way of cargo, animals, and human beings that would reach the town must embark in a curious kind of raft attached to a strong chain stretching across the river. Immediately the raft is loosened from the side, the force of the water carries it across the river, the pulley running along the supporting chain. This raft is worked from 6 o'clock in the morning until 6 in the evening, the small fee of 2d. halfpenny being charged for passing a horse and his rider, 3 halfpence for a mule load, and a penny for a foot passenger. A line of railway connects this place with the town of Honda, and runs to the part of the river where the steamboats land, called Yeguas, about 4 miles from Honda. At this point the mountains which wall in the valley of the Magdalena are very near to each other, and there seems to be no breeze which ever reaches the town. It is proverbially known all over the country as being very hot, and I have seldom seen the thermometer fall below 95° Fahrenheit in the shade. It is a curiously built little town, with neither system nor design in the architecture. It was at one time large and important, but earthquakes have proved its ruin, and now the fine churches, convents, hospitals, and even a beautiful stone bridge have all been destroyed. Travellers to the interior must inevitably pass this way, and everyone will find lodging houses and facilities for hiring mules, etc., to help him on his way to the capital. When I got on board the steamboat here to descend the Magdalena River, I practically said good bye for the time being to 4 states of this magnificent country, Boyaca, Cundinamarca, El Cauca, and El Tolima. No pen or picture has or ever will be able to give more than a faint idea of the glories of this part of Colombia, of its riches in mines of emeralds and gold and silver, of its agricultural products of coffee, cocoa, and grain, of its trackless forests with their exhaustless supply of timber and choice woods, its wealth of ornamental and medicinal plants, its bevies of gaudy coloured birds and curious animals, its snow-capped mountains and boundless prairies where the Indians have always roamed with perfect freedom, or of its commercial cities with their rich and cultivated inhabitants. Even the most stoical Englishman who has travelled here and seen its beauties cannot help but regret that so many thousand miles divide this paradise from our own little island. The descent of the river Magdalena was made quickly and agreeably, and we very soon arrived at the port called Puerto Berrio. This is the port by which travellers reach the prosperous city of Medellin, one of the most important centres of the country, and the home of Cattleya dowiana aurea and Cattleya warsowitzii. Puerto Berrio has a special interest to all English orchid collectors. A rough cross of wood on the edge of the forest, on the higher bank of the river, marks the last resting place of Chesterton, the well known orchid collector, who did such good service for the firm of James Vetch and Sons long before the wholesale plunder and extermination of the plants brought about by modern collectors. A small mountain town called Frontino has given up to the present all the Miltonia vexillaria, but the woods in the vicinity have become already pretty well cleared. I had heard much about the plants to be found between the river Opon and the river Carrere. These are two rivers which together drain the southern part of the state of Santander, and the land lying between them is a narrow strip less than 100 miles wide. I descended the river to a place called Barranca Bermeja, with the object of getting a canoe to navigate the river Opon. This, I was told, would require at least 6 men, well armed. The river is not navigable for more than 50 miles, and the distance is intercepted by fallen trees, while the forest between the two rivers is infested by hordes of hostile Indians. The first 2 days nothing extraordinary happened. The banks of the river were thick forest, and we saw no tracks of the Indians. Each night we camped on a sandbank. I saw no orchids, the land being too flat, but on the 3rd day we passed many tracks of the Indians and some abandoned huts. About midday, as we suddenly made a curve in the river, a shower of arrows whistled past us and fell far ahead. They had been aimed too high and shot with too much force. In the direction the arrows came from we saw nothing, not even a rustling of the foliage. We fired several times into the bush and proceeded more cautiously. My companions would have turned back, some of them becoming afraid, but an unconquerable curiosity possessed me to see what there was in the way of plants on the higher ground. It was evident that the Indians knew by this time all along the river of our ascent, and more than once I saw dusky forms creeping stealthily away from the banks as the canoe glided into sight. I had been informed that the Indians were very much scattered over the country, and although they maintain a deadly hatred against all civilized human beings, the fact of our ascending the river would not be sufficient to make them congregate in numbers, and the stragglers along the banks, although hostile in the highest degree, are cowardly and afraid of firearms. On the 4th day, proceeding with the greatest difficulty on account of the fallen trees, we came to some 3 or 4 small sheds, with plantations of maize in front of them. A few animal skins were lying about, but every one of the inhabitants had taken to the woods. The very emptiness of the huts showed that their manner of life must be of the most primitive kind. However warlike they are towards outsiders, there are accounts that they live together in the greatest friendship and good faith. We left the huts very much as we found them, and proceeded up the river. I had seen several very pretty oncidiums on the banks, and I had begun to hope that we were clear of the Indians. On the night of the 4th day we camped as usual on a sandbank, not being able to proceed further on account of the bad state of the river. Knowing that we were in the very middle of the Indian territory, where, if they chose, they could overpower us with numbers any moment, we passed the night somewhat nervously, with a very small fire, but with our rifles loaded, and while 3 slept the other 3 kept watch. Nothing happened to us that night, and early in the morning, after breakfasting, I started into the forest with 4 of the men, leaving the other 2 in ambush to watch the canoe, for fear the Indians should take away our only means of getting back to the Magdalena. I was delighted to find the trees on the rising ground from the banks of the river hung with fine clumps of Miltonia vexillaria, intermixed with Oncidium carthaginense and several smaller orchids, and I was priding myself upon reaping a glorious harvest. But that night all my plans were destined to be crushed. Everybody was in good spirits at our evening meal, but we had scarcely finished and lighted our roll of tobacco when the twang of an arrow as it whistled past my head startled everyone to his feet. In another moment one of our number was pierced with 3 of the deadly poisoned arrows and mortally wounded. The moon was on the wane and shed a miserable light for us to shoot by, while the savages could see us perfectly well by the light of our fire. Not a moment was lost in hiding ourselves behind the nearest trees, and we were scarcely placed when another shower of arrows showed us the position of the Indians. Seeing us retreat, they had advanced more into the open. At the same moment a blaze of fire poured out of 5 trusty rifles, and a terrible howl rose from the throats of the surprised and wounded Indians, who up to the present had not uttered a sound. In a moment every mark for us to aim at had disappeared, but we fired another volley in the direction they had gone. For some time after, the rushing sound in the forest informed us that they were retreating and taking away their dead or wounded. I thought they would return, but my companions believed that the report of firearms was so little known to them that one encounter would be enough, and they proved right. As soon as day dawned we carefully reconnoitred in all directions. However, on that side we found nothing but the trail of the Indians and the pools of blood left by the victims of our bullets. I had been anxious to capture one of the Indians, so as to see what sort of people they really were, as up to the present I had caught nothing of them but the faintest glimpse. In this I was quite unexpectedly gratified. 2 of the men were reconnoitering along the bank of the river near the canoe, when they came upon one of the Indians alone, probably a scout. He offered no resistance, but cowered on the ground as if to beg for mercy. I was surprised the 2 men had not shot him at first sight, but perhaps they were moved with pity, or were actuated by the same curiosity as myself. At any rate, I was as much surprised as the Indian when the 2 men brought him to me. He was a young man, apparently about 22 years of age, tall, and of a fine physical form. His skin was a rich bronze. I had heard that these Indians adorn themselves with feather head dresses, but this one wore no ornaments, his only clothing being a small piece of grass cloth tied around the loins. He was armed with the usual native bow, some arrows, and a lance. In the short time he was with us we were not successful in getting any communication whatever from him, even by signs, and he refused all food. I succeeded in getting a photograph of him, which operation I supposed he thought was to be the end of him, he appeared so frightened. Apart from the vacant air of the untaught man of the woods, he had no savage look, and when left to himself in his own native haunts, I should think he was good natured. We took away his weapons, and then left him to return to his companions. In a moment he was off with a bound, like a deer, and that was the last I saw of the Opon Indians. We quickly made a suitable resting place for our dead companion, and however loath we were to leave him there, we had no remedy. Loosing our canoe from its moorings, in less than 2 days the rapid stream landed us in the waters of the Magdalena, and for the future, however much I may covet the orchid gems of the head waters of the Opon, they must remain there for my part until the last red man has disappeared from his territory. End of Chapter 11. Recording by Arnold Banner, Thurmond, North Carolina.